from the old paradigms that do not align with the interests of working people, and this must change. Let's not forget that just a little over 9 years ago, investment giant Bear Stearns collapsed, and by the fall of 2008, all the major banks needed bailing out, and the smartest minds in the finance industry brought us to this precipice. Their investment approaches, shaped by groupthink, bias, and hubris, gave us the Great Recession and almost led pension funds to the ultimate failure, an inability to pay the promised benefits. The dominant thinking in finance that led to the 2007 crises and to the 1 in 5 Californians living in poverty have not disappeared. Globally, according to Oxfam, 8 men own the same wealth as 3.6 billion people who make up the poorest half of humanity. And while it's clear that these 8 men know how to do well by themselves as they invest, does anyone really think that the strategies they and other members of the financial elite line up with interests of CalPERS and CalSTRS participants in their family? I can tell you what I know from my members and the people we represent. The answer is no. We need investment approaches that realize all of us help create value, from the office clerk to the CEO of the C-suite. James Baldwin said, "Nothing that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So the question is, how boldly do we face this moment and decisively break from old thinking? How boldly do we go to diversify? We need fresh minds with fresh perspectives. We need talented people who reflect the diversity of our beneficiaries and act in their interests. We need workplaces that support diversity, that want to hear new ideas, that welcome out-of-the-box perspectives. In particular, the perspectives of women, workers, people of colors, and others traditionally marginalized by the investment management industry. And despite the work of many of you in this room, we have a long way to go. So I just want to share just one data point. According to the California's Pay Equity Task Force, Latinas and Black women in state service make 54% and 63% respectively of white men's earnings. So this really does not it's not reflective of a culture of diversity and inclusion we need to succeed. So if we move towards a culture of opening our minds to new ways of thinking, we will find the right people. And if we invest in them and create a welcoming and creative workspace that allows them to grow and flourish, they will stay on the job and recruit others to the task at hand. So let's build off the work that brought us here today. Let's move out of our comfort zones. Let's fish in new pools. Let's commit to personal and institutional reflection on how our own behaviors and filters encourage and discourage diversity. Let's track the data and be honest with ourselves when the data comes in. Let's have difficult conversations about race, gender, identity, and culture that lead to growth, hope, and new and creative places. Let's all be visionaries. Let's become the employers of choice for people who embrace diversity and intersectionality. So thank you very much, and thank you CalPERS and CalSTRS for the work that you're doing in this arena.
Wow, how y'all doing? I'm Billy Dexter, and I actually just had a chance to travel in from Chicago, and I got a view of Sacramento for about 15 minutes. And then I'm on a flight back, actually going to New York, so I have to make another trip to Sacramento to learn a little bit more about the city. But I wanted to, first of all, say thank you to CalPERS and CalSTRS for hosting us. So I'm going to act like you guys are not here, and we're just going to have a conversation in my living room on the couch. Unfortunately, we don't have some wine and cheese, but we'll make it work. Because this always goes better with a little wine and cheese. Okay. I'm going to just give a general question to the whole panel, and then we'll. Gosh, I'm losing my voice. Sorry about that. Okay, I think I'm good now. Man, that wine would be good right now. We are in California, right? But I'm going to give a general question to the whole panel, and then I've got about 4 or 5 questions that I've prepared for them, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions. But to the panel, for years we've been talking about the business case for diversity, and we've actually moved beyond the business case, because I don't think anybody would disagree that there's a business case to support diversity. But as we started to talk about inclusion and the relevancy of inclusion to your organizations, can you speak about that just from a business relevancy standpoint? What does this mean to your organization today and in the future? Julianne, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Haskell from State Street. When I was thinking about that question, I was actually thinking about being asked a similar question, but being asked in front of eighth graders, and how do you make the business case for diversity at a parent type event? And I thought, this is how I explained it. We want the best people making the best decisions for our customers and for themselves and for the company. So when do you make the best decisions? Are they easy? They're never easy. It's never an easy thing to come up with the best solution to a problem. So if you surround yourself with people just like you, who think like you, act like you, have the same experience as you, you're going to have a really fast answer. It's going to sound a lot like what you would have thought of, and you might think, that's a good decision. But what if I then said to myself, let me surround myself by people who think differently than me, who are going to challenge me, who aren't going to want to get out of the room and just agree with me. They're going to push back and say, have you thought of X, Y, or Z before you make that decision? That's not easy. It's hard. But boy, are you going to get a great decision when you finish that conversation. So when I think about the business case for diversity, I think, let's make those best decisions. And those are only going to come when we have great people who think differently at that table, pushing back, challenging each other respectfully, and then coming out with a solution that's going to solve the problem that's at hand.
Great, thank you. John.
Sure, I'm John Bowman. I'm Managing Director of the Americas for CFA Institute. First of all, I just want to thank CalPERS and CalSTRS too. As you've heard from this stage, we are partners and like-minded on several different fronts, and so diversity being one of them, of course, and so we're very thrilled to be part of this conference. I have to first start with a confession, is that Helena Morrissey completely stole my mojo, so my conference life is over. I have 6 kids, and usually in a room, people are like, and so in diversity settings, the fact that I have 3 girls and I'm married to my favorite girl, it sends a very clear message that I'm vested and personally invested in gender diversity in particular, and now Helena would just say, well, you're just getting started with this small family. So my jokes are gone nonetheless. Real quickly, CFA Institute, I think, looks at this issue of diversity with a much wider zoom lens than I think most in the room. And if I may, perhaps the one thing that's not been talked about enough over the course of this very exciting day has been, yes, this is the right thing to do. We've always known that, and that should be enough. And now, as you've said, Billy, we now have statistical proof through academically rigorous studies across all metrics and measures that this is good for the bottom line and good for business outcomes. That's all great, but as an organization whose mission is to lead and steward the profession overall, we think that the lack of diversity is really a symptom of a much larger existential question, one of what do we want to be as an industry when we grow up? We have unless you've been having a kind of Captain America sleeping issue since '08, we've had a serious reputational crisis, one where the public square is questioning our trustworthiness, our competency, our ability to deliver on investment outcomes. And as we know, adding cognitive, gender, ethnic diversity to a team helps you achieve investor outcomes. And so we think that this is part of a larger slate and larger initiative, and that's the reason that we're so passionate about it, is that if we don't wrestle back this narrative of finance and investment management for the greater good, for social purpose, then folks, we could be disintermediated. And this trust erosion will continue to falter. So that's the kind of larger aperture view in which CFA Institute looks at the issue.
Okay. Susan, how do you move beyond the business case to business relevancy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Billy. So I'm Susan Reid. I head up diversity for Morgan Stanley. And, you know, as we were talking about this topic, one of the things that, you know, I said to Billy, and that's clear to me, is I think for a lot of people, the idea of the business case being the workforce is changing is too distant. It's too far away, right, for your average leader or manager to want to act today, right? So I think one of the challenges we all have is how do you make it relevant for people today? When I think about Morgan Stanley, you know, we have 3 legs to our stool, right? We have our asset management business, we have our wealth management business, and we have our institutional securities business. On the asset management side, quite frankly, the burning platform for us is clients often asking about diversity and wanting to see diverse people at the table, right? Often as a condition of doing business with the firm. And I think the more that clients ask, quite frankly, the better it is for firms like Morgan Stanley, because you're pushing us, in fact, to address an issue that we all need to address. On the wealth management side, it's interesting, right? We've done a lot of looking at our business model, and what's interesting is there are 2 things that are creating pressures for us. One is technology changing and becoming very much a factor in people investing and people making investment decisions. And the second thing is just the aging workforce. And you know, our average age of our financial advisors is about 60, right? And what we're seeing is lots of women and younger people who are accumulating wealth, or through wealth transfer, they're going to be managing a lot of money. They want a financial advisor who looks like them. You know, on the institutional side, sometimes it's harder to make the business case, but again, we see more and more clients stepping up and saying, when you send a team to do business with us, we want a diverse team. It's a condition of doing business with us, and I think that's a game changer when clients ask.
Okay, great. Dorothy.
I'm going to come at this from a little different perspective because I'm Dorothy Leland. I'm chancellor of the University of California, Merced, which happens to be one of the most diverse research universities in the United States. We have well over 70% of our students are from low income, first generation, and minority families. And I've worked in higher education all my life, and I can tell you something that I've learned by working with these students. And of course, my business is to create the talent pipeline to your business. And what I've learned by working with these students is they bring something that helps make the case for why you should be looking at them. They have overcome enormous obstacles to be in the University of California. So there's a kind of creativity, a kind of determination, a kind of drive to succeed. They bring, they're very innovative because they've had to be innovative to make it and to, you know, to continue to adapt to an environment that often no one in their family has been in before, and not only to survive but to thrive. And third, they're community spirited. So they're not just in it for themselves, but they're in it for their families and their communities. And those are sort of intangible assets that you don't see in resumes often, that these young people bring, that I think make a really strong business case for wanting them at the decision-making, creative table in thinking about the future of your industry.
Great. Dorothy, I'm going to stay with you for a second. Because you are on the forefront of preparing students for the workforce. Yeah. And as a majority institution, what are some of the specific things that you guys are doing to preparing young people for the workforce?
Well, we hopefully we're doing all the right things. These are enormously talented and bright young people, they have great drive and determination to succeed. So we don't have to build those qualities in them, they come with them. But they also often come in environments where they haven't had the same kinds of advantages of other people. So we make sure that we help them compensate for those environments and to gain the skill sets that they need to be successful. Secondly, I think like every quality higher education institution across the nation, we pay attention to what business and industry tells us about the sort of the generic workplace skills that they want to see us producing. So speaking skills, writing skills, critical thinking and analysis skills, the ability to work in team, the ability to work in diverse cross-cultural environments, the not just needing to be led, but to be on the cutting edge and to be innovative and creative, not to be afraid to take risks. So one of the things we tell our students when they come to UC Merced is that, you know, they will be part of an innovative and creative culture. And that part of what they get to do, since we're only 11 years old, is create the future culture of the institution. You know, it's clubs, it's directions, it's traditions, it's ceremonies, and that unleashes a really remarkable creativity and investment in actually helping build and grow the institution. So I think those are all really important workplace skills.
Okay, great. Julianne and Susan, you guys are both involved in the talent acquisition recruitment process. And you have a commitment within your organization to recruiting diverse talent, the mid-level all the way through the executive level. Can you share a little bit about some of the unique things that you're doing? And maybe Susan, we'll start with you.
Sure. So it's interesting. So recruiting is definitely on our minds, and we have a number of programs at the campus level, all the way through senior levels. And what's always surprising to me is what works, because sometimes people think that things won't work and then they work, and sometimes people are hesitant to try things because they think that if they approach students of color with a special program, that's going to be a turnoff. So I'll give you two examples. We have a particular challenge around getting diverse folks into our sales and trading teams, right? That's a team where, you know, people come in for the summer, they have to quickly establish relationships, and they have to be able to use those relationships to convert the summer experience into a job offer. And we've struggled for years getting those numbers up. And last summer, we all sat together in a room, a bunch of us, and said, what can we do? What can we do to change the dynamic? And we decided that the thing that we needed to do was to bring students of color in early, before the summer started, and give them time with the senior people and have them learn a little bit about our culture so that they would be more comfortable in the work environment once the summer started. And there was lots of hand-wringing around, can we do that, or are they going to be uncomfortable? Are they going to think this is a special effort? Well, we did it. And the efforts paid off, right? The students came in, they had a great experience, they learned about the firm, they walked away feeling more comfortable, and we saw the conversion rate after the summer increase because the students had come in a little bit early and had that experience. And so, you know, I encourage people to try things like that because sometimes people are hesitant and it works. The other thing I'll mention is we had an effort at our senior levels to get more managing directors of color into the firm. For a long time, we had, you know, a certain number, we had set a plateau, and we had an operating committee meeting, and after, again, lots of hand-wringing, our CEO, James Gorman, said, you know what, I'm going to chair an effort to get more black managing directors into the firm. I'm going to do it personally. And he did. And what was interesting, Billy, is he initially started with a group of other black MDs and asked the black MDs to help, and we worked with him over a period of time. But at the end of the day, we set a target to hire 3 new black managing directors. We ended up hiring 6, and most of those hires came through majority colleagues, not colleagues of color. These were people who existed, who were in their networks, and when they took the time to think about who they knew and to bring them into the firm, we were able to not just meet the goal, but to exceed the goal. So those are some of the things that we've tried that have worked, and I think, you know, the thing that I would encourage is we've got to do more risk-taking and try those things because they do work. They require investment, but they can work.
To that point, what was it specifically that got those majority managing directors to kind of, get on board with recruiting diverse talent? I mean, I'm sure this wasn't the first time this was brought to the table, but what got them going?
But it was the first time our CEO said, I'm personally chairing this effort. And when the CEO says it, it gets done.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Julianne?
Yeah, I think for us, similar ideas around trying things that are new. So we've always had strong recruiting and diversity, but one of the things we realized, our numbers weren't shifting the way we wanted to. So this past year, we stood up a diversity sourcing office, which is quite different. So it's not about going out and talking to people who are applying for jobs. It's about creating a group of people who are going out and actively seeking diverse talent, whether either they're looking for a job or kind of that passive job seeker. And I think that group going out and talking to people about State Street specifically, whether they're looking for a job or not, and looking at diversity across all dimensions as well, whether it's people of color, whether it's women, military, disabled, whether it's moms who've left the workplace and want to come back after, say, a 10-year stint. Those folks are out there talking to potential employees, whether they're going to be potential employees in 2 weeks or maybe 2 years, but really building the reputation of State Street within that population. We're starting to see that pay off. I think the other piece we heard this morning, which we were doing, so I actually texted a friend and said, I think we're on to something, was we have implemented requirements of diverse slates for our managing director and above positions. I think that gets to sort of the what gets measured, what gets done. Again, not something we had done in the past, but we do require diverse slates, a person of color, a woman, and depending on how many other people, say up to 5. We do require that. And at the same time, though, not to make it a quota, what we're doing unconscious bias training as well. So as people are interviewing folks, they're sort of getting a feeling of how do I look at myself and how I'm interviewing folks and how I'm listening to what they're saying. And I think those two together have really started to change the way people are coming into the organization. Although the last piece I did want to say is I always say to all of our managers, sometimes the best recruiting can be done internally. Some of the best people are sitting right outside your door or across from Boston to California. Those folks are here at State Street. So we really focus as well using our employee networks to be ambassadors for our company, making sure that they're standing up, raising their hand, asking for the jobs that might be stretch assignments, and really getting out there talking about themselves, because that best talent is often sitting right in our organization.
Great. You mentioned unconscious bias training, but any other training for Susan that you guys and you, Julianne, have done specifically around moving the needle as it relates to inclusion?
I think for us, we have been focusing on the unconscious bias training. We do not make it mandatory. That was interesting. We had talked about making it mandatory. It's interesting to show that data shows that's not the best way to do it. But I think it's how you apply that training across all aspects of your organization. So when we look at our promotion process and who's making promotion decisions, we're talking about bias. When we're looking at recruiting and interviewing, we're talking about bias. When we're just looking at how we talk to each other, how do we interact with each other, how do we learn from each other, you talk about how do you talk to people who may be different. To your point about taking chances, sometimes it is hard to go out to someone who may be different than you and ask, hey, how's it going? And I think it's trying to get that type of language and that type of training permeate across the organization in different ways is really the way we're approaching it.
Okay, great. John, at CFA, are you guys doing anything unique as it relates to recruiting or reaching out to diverse talent?
I don't know how unique or revolutionary it is, but certainly we're trying to play our part in this wider journey. We looked at the end of the pipeline first as we think about our business model. So 140,000 members worldwide. We started with gender as the universal diversifier as a good starting point, and only 18% are women. And we're a pretty good proxy for the industry. The industry, I mean, with that many people, is about the same as we are. Now, more alarming than the embarrassing absolute number is the fact that that number, 18%, hadn't moved in 5 years. So very little progress had been made. So then we said, okay, let's look at the front end of the pipeline. How many of the candidates, particularly on the front end of that pipeline as they move through level 1, 2, and 3, are women? And it's a little bit higher, kind of low 20s. But nonetheless, from an absolute basis, we weren't seeing the level of progress we wanted. So we started with just an awareness campaign. Our Women in Investment Management initiative started 18 months ago. We did some research to try to reinforce a lot of the business case stuff that Credit Suisse and Morningstar and others had done. We have a marquee event. We're trying to enable our local chapters to do work on networking and mentoring at the local level. But I think the next frontier to get to this recruiting point is in universities. So a lot of our research, what it suggested, and our research partners are actually right here in UC Davis and Berkeley, quite ironically, but a lot of what it suggested is that we're losing girls much earlier than we ever imagined for the investment management business. And so, no surprise, a lot of it is role modeling. So if their parents, particularly their moms, were in STEM disciplines or vocations, the girls tend to follow. If they don't, they don't. Similarly, in university, even if those that have pursued finance degrees, maybe even enter into an internship program with a Morgan Stanley, a Goldman or investment management organization, we often find that they get disenchanted. A portion of young women get disenchanted. And what the research suggests, and I'm typecasting a little bit, but is that women tend to be more value-driven and purpose-driven and want to align their work with what they believe. And sadly, this gets back to the reputational crisis. What they find is this real or perceived self-feeding machination of lining our pockets and revenue maximization, and not the original narrative of why we started as a business, which is to steward hopes and dreams and create prosperity and all the good things that finance is meant to do. And so we are trying to now reach into universities and start to change that mindset, co-opt that narrative back. One of the things that I've heard a recent speaker said is that for young girls, they need to know that we're just not a bunch of math nerds. And as charter holders, I can laugh at myself with this. You know, it's nice when we can communicate and be empathizers and relate. But we're psychologists and CIA agents, and we are investigative reporters, and anybody that analyzes securities knows this. But those parts of the business and the competencies that allow for that are lost in this PR battle that we've clearly lost, as I said. So the messaging needs to be, and narrative needs to be completely changed in university to start attracting more girls.
Okay.
If I can just add on to that, because we were talking about it in the line back there, I think one of the greatest things for me when I think about the Fearless Girl statue that's out there, it gets to the point that you're making. We're having conversations with young girls and young boys around what can be in the financial services area, and that wasn't happening before. So when you hear those conversations, you get people excited about this work as opposed to questioning it. It really does make you think we've made a difference.
Yes.
And you know, you're not likely, these young people are not likely to have had the experience anyplace else unless you provide it for them.
That's right.
So we know, because we're STEM intensive campus, and we know from our students that they are more likely to find employment through an internship opportunity because they've actually learned about the business of the industry through that opportunity and had no awareness prior to that point in time about how it might relate to their interests or their skills, because no one in their family has been in that industry sector.
Yeah. Billy, quick anecdote. I was in
Yes.
your part of the world, Chicago, 2 weeks ago, and I was having breakfast with a female senior leader of a major organization, asset management organization in Chicago. And she's a senior fixed income portfolio manager, which is the lost world for women, as you know, the last frontier. And she was telling me, as many I'm sure struggle, how difficult it is recruiting women into fixed income. And so I'm sure you've all heard these types of anecdotes, but there was a portfolio management position, 112 resumes, and I'm sure I'm getting the math wrong, but it was something like 6 of them were female, and of course she said, and all of them were ineligible, so we threw the resumes away right away, and we didn't interview any. And Celia's presentation earlier was so striking to me, that little thought map where she said, would you rather have the person that had 8 of the 10 right, or 4 of the 10, but 2 of those 4 were the 2 that are missing from every other person on the team. And ironically, the man, me, was challenging her, said, well, maybe you've got the wrong qualifications here. Are you looking in the same pool? This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right. If you want 20 years of fixed income portfolio management, it's going to be a bunch of middle-aged white guys, again. And so you've got to take risk, as Susan said, step out of your comfort zone and hire the competencies and capabilities that are going to fit that jigsaw in ways that you've not experienced before.
Yeah, and I think you're so right on that, John. I do want to go back to you, Dorothy. The early part of my career, I started in career services at Michigan State University. That was, long, long time ago. And I remember distinctively trying to recruit employers to come and recruit our students. You have a captive audience here of
Come.
what would you want them to know about your students and what you're doing uniquely at UC Merced?
Well, I think I'll tell you again. First, we have a diversity pipeline that you want and lead. It's STEM intensive. It's the University of California. And I can tell you it's not easy to get in the University of California, and it's recognized internationally as one of the top universities in the world. These are bright kids. But over and above that, they have these extra qualities that I think are important. They're adaptable. They're creative. They're tenacious. They're determined. They have a civic spirit and heart. And it's remarkable what that can do for a student population and the climate and feel of a campus, and I think it can do the same thing for a business and an industry.
Okay. John, I'm going to give you the last word, but before that, I want to go to Susan and Julianne. You guys have had some success within your organizations in recruiting diverse talent and developing a strategy and getting key stakeholders engaged. If you could give the audience one tip that helped you kind of move the needle a little bit, or to at least get people in line, what would that be? Susan?
So I think leadership has to step out and do two things. One, clear the path, and then lead by example, right? So clear the path. I think, so many times what I hear about diversity hiring is, I don't have the head count. That's sort of like the one of the things you hear very often. And the truth is, if you're a really small organization, maybe you can get away with saying, I don't have the head count to hire, and that's why we're not there. But if you're a big organization like a Morgan Stanley, that's an excuse. We hire thousands and thousands of people every day. We can be creative in terms of, so I think leadership has to clear the path and say to people, that can't be the answer, right? That's not why we're not hiring more diverse people or promoting more people, right? And then I think lead by example, and I think what James did is a really good example of leading by example. When you have your CEO who steps out and says, I'm going to lead the effort to get more senior people into the firm, it's amazing to me. I saw so many other people then follow through on his example, right? We had another example where the operating committee for the firm 2 years ago decided to themselves personally mentor and sponsor high potential women and people of color. So every single person on our operating committee, all the people who reported to James, each took 2 people. I was one of the beneficiaries. I had someone on the OpCo who decided he wanted to mentor me. I said, sure, I'll take it. And it was fabulous. And what happened after we announced that the OpCo was doing that effort, every other business, the OpCos for every other business, they decided to replicate that, and they ran mentorship and sponsorship
Funny how
programs.
that works, right?
Yeah, it's funny how it works. So I do think leadership has to clear the path, and you have to lead by example and demonstrate by example, what you want to see happen in the diversity space.
Great. Julianne, any thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I think the leadership from the top is so important. Someone asked a question this morning about the queen bee syndrome, that women don't help women, and I almost wanted to take a mic and answer the question from a State Street perspective. Because similar to what you...
The queen bee syndrome.
Women do help women, and in fact, our most senior women at State Street took that, similar to what you just talked about, took it upon themselves to create a mentoring program within their group. When they said, we each are going to mentor 2 women who we feel are ready for that next level. We're going to help them find jobs that they might not absolutely have access to. But what I thought was great about what happened there is it kind of I call it the Wella Balsam syndrome, if you're old enough to remember what Wella Balsam was. 2 people to wash the hair and 2 more people wash their hair. So it trickled down in our organization where the next level women said, hey, this was so important to me, I'm going to then take 2 women on the next level down and the next level down. And all of a sudden now at State Street, we have a program that's involving like 5,000 women across the world. The other piece, though, that I think is so important when you talk about culture and making people want to stay in an organization, it's letting your employees drive the culture, letting them be part of the decisions that affect them. And one of the things I've been most proud of in my career at State Street is what we've done with employee networks. At State Street, we have 23 employee networks. That's a lot of networks to support, 110 chapters globally. But what those employees are doing is they're speaking up and they're telling us what they want, what's important to them, what matters in their careers. They're getting the opportunities to develop themselves as speakers, meeting with leaders, working with the community organizations that they want to work with. And I think when you're looking at State Street and coming in and you see that networks and thousands of people part of it, it kind of says this is when we talk about stronger together as a corporate value, it's kind of being lived and breathed by our employees, and I think that makes a difference.
Great. John, I want to come back to you to get your comments around the future of financial services industry in a broader context. Why is this important, this diversity and inclusion to the broader financial services industry from your perspective?
Yeah, can I just add a quick addendum to
Sure,
this too?
absolutely.
Because I would have answered exactly the same as these two ladies did as far as starts with the top. There's no doubt about it. Our CEO has been very vocal on this, has led with his feet, joined the 30% Club, which we're going to hit a year early at our board, which we're very excited about. But I think also Ted and Chris up here earlier is a really important additional layer on that, because rightly or wrongly, it's great if Ron O'Hanley at SSGA and James at Morgan Stanley are doing this out of the goodness of their heart and their belief in it being right. But when the clients actually start adding it to the RFP and pressuring it through the client reviews, you know, things move very quickly.
Right.
So I just was really encouraged to hear $500 billion actually moving capital allocation as a result of this principle. So that's great. Well, I think it's what I said earlier, Billy. I think we're very concerned about the state of the profession and even question whether it can be a profession when the public square doesn't think that we have their best interests in mind. That's why this whole fiduciary battle was such a battleground for the soul of who we are, right? What are we actually in business to do? Why are we showing up at work? Is it for ourselves or is it for our clients? And as I said, we've lost that narrative. The new client, the millennial, the new wealthy client, ultimately the beneficiaries on the institutional side, they are much more cost-centric, much more skeptical, and ultimately much more value-centric on what they're going to be paying for. Are we really as good as we say we are? Are we really worth the money that we say that we are? Are we as transparent as we should be as far as the types of products that we're buying, our investment processes? And that's why you see this disruptive storm of technology substitutes and the passive shift. These are not disruptions based upon those in isolation. It's a larger value scrutiny from the clients. And if we don't get this investment outcome identity back, which diversity can really help with, then as I said, I think the industry is going to continue to suffer in the public realm.
Okay. Well, I think we've got about 10, 15 minutes for some Q&A, but before we get to that, I just wanted to give one take on this whole issue, just from my own perspective of having been in and out of the realm of diversity and inclusion from a bunch of different viewpoints. And one of the things that's been very interesting to me, and I'm glad that this panel is here and that you guys have spent the day talking about this topic. But I've always just been surprised that this isn't rocket science. If organizations wanted to recruit at a parity level or to make sure that they're representative of women and people of color, it's not rocket science. It's really an issue around commitment and relevancy. And all you have to do is look at some of the other initiatives that are happening within your organizations where there's the best teams are being put onto these projects. There's rigor, there's strategy, there are milestones, there are people that are held accountable. You're checking in on where your the progress is at. The leaders at the top have made a commitment. And if we start to really focus around moving the needle as it relates to diversity and inclusion from a recruitment and retention, I mean, this is something that can, we could tell a very different story. It just has to be a commitment. So with that, I do want to open it up to questions. I think we've got some microphones that are floating around in the back. I can't really see you guys, so if you have a question, maybe raise your hand and we'll get someone to you with the microphone. Don't be shy. Okay, here's one right here. Oh, there's two. Okay, let's start over here.
Really quickly, since you know the talent that we're literally raising today, you know they might still be learning how to walk and talk, and are looking at all of us as examples. Thinking through the challenge of getting women and people of color into STEM fields. What creative things have you seen in your own colleges, you know, on campuses, within your own organizations? I'll give you a quick example. We have an analyst who works with us who, unlike all of the other analysts, did not take a single investment banking class. She did not join the investment banking club. She is instead a journalism major. And I so appreciate your comment about the fact that, you know, here in the financial industry, we're not just number crunchers. We actually are investigating journalists and psychologists. So important. Are there examples from your own organizations where you've taken people from outside of STEM and brought them in and mentored them and trained them in that new field?
Anybody? Dorothy? Anything you guys have done uniquely around STEM programs? Or?
Yeah, we've done a lot, and they're pipeline programs. And the place where you really need to start building that pipeline is middle school, because aspirations are formed about that level and sort of sense of who I can be and who I might be. So right now we have grants from the National Aeronautic Space Association, the National Institute of Health, and the National Science Foundation, and they're all STEM pipeline grants to, you know, go into schools mainly and make engineering interesting, make mathematics fun, make programming cool, aimed at minorities and girls. So we've found, and there's a reason that these national foundations fund this kind of stuff, because they're successful. You know, they've been shown to open eyes and create aspirations that weren't there before, and they're particularly important if you follow that up. It's just not a year program or a 2-year program, but you bring some mechanism to keep revisiting that pipeline until these kids are getting ready to enter a college, university, or if the pipeline is to a specific industry, to enter that industry. So you find some way of tracking them. It may be a week in the summer where they visit a campus and learn something new, or it may be that you're going to do a drone demonstration and you have special invitations for people to come out and participate in the drone demonstration. Whatever it is, I'm a firm believer, and there's data to show that pipeline programs, if they are started early enough, and that if you monitor that pipeline and pay attention to it, actually work. So if they work in recruiting in colleges into fields like computer science, where women have been declining, and other areas, I think they also should work equally well into specific industries.
Okay, great. I think there was another question.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, got you.
I'm Maura Cunningham. I'm the founder and executive director of Rock the Street, Wall Street. So following up on that question, even though they gave me the mic before that question, we are trying to do something creative about this. Rock the Street, Wall Street is a financial literacy program designed to spark the interest of high school girls into careers of finance. And with regard to trying to be creative, one of the things we have to own, I think, as an industry, the financial services industry, is this problem of financial illiteracy. 80% of the teachers, of which I have many in my family, and I'm sure there's some in the room, self-report that they are not competent to teach financial literacy. So given that fact, and that's going to continue to be the fact, I do think that the industry needs to own that problem. I also want to comment on, John, you mentioned that the person that you spoke with, the woman that you spoke with who was looking for fixed income candidates, and she had 6 only out of 112. That should be paused for thought. She only had 6 out of 112. And then while there are a lot of window dressing things being done by firms, I think we do need to reach down to a younger level rather than just at the college level, because the girls have already self-selected out of STEM. And you know, here's the big secret: finance isn't anything more than first-year algebra, for the most part. And so what we're doing is lifting the veil, as it were, on that concept for the girls. So my question is this. The financial firms, particularly, I think we need to get a syndicate together or a consortium together to own the problem of financial illiteracy in the country. And by the way, not only for as few girls as we have, I'm sure fewer Hispanic and fewer African American candidates. And to own this problem and come together to try to create a better financial literacy program in the schools by bringing in ourselves into those schools, which our volunteers do. But also, how do we get financial firms to understand that, yes, there is a longer tail to these outcomes, but that it's worth it in the end for society and for the industry itself?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any thoughts on that, on financial literacy programs? Are you guys involved in any of that work?
We do some of it, and we get it. I mean, you're preaching to the choir, certainly at least the people on this stage. I mean, I think we totally get that the financial literacy piece is actually super important. I think the idea of a consortium is a really good one. I think that's quite frankly one of our challenges is we're often, fighting over the same pools of candidates, right? And I think one of the challenge for all of us is we all have to come together and figure out ways to invest so that we're creating new talent, right? And growing new talent so that we have a bigger pool to choose from. So I think that's quite frankly one of the tasks that we all have to pay attention to. The only thing I would add is, I think obviously girls in STEM is very, very important, but one thing that we should be, we should acknowledge is that there are many people working in our industry who do not have degrees in finance.
Right.
So you don't have to have a degree in finance to be in our industry, and I think sometimes when we focus too much on that, we actually lose out on really good talent. People who are analytical and who are quantitative, who might have majored in politics or English or whatever it may be. So I think part of it is we have to broaden our thought process around who's a viable candidate and look for skills and not necessarily just look for the degree to say finance.
Yeah, and from my experience, sometimes it's getting that thought process beyond the hiring managers that are looking for some of the traditional backgrounds, that there are some of these other unique skills that people that may not have a finance, related background or traditional.
100%.
Yeah. We got time for one more question. Was there one?
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Oh, there's one in the back. We'll come to you, and then that'll be it. All the way in the back.
So I've been very encouraged by the panel discussion, and I find it very compelling in terms of your discussion of your successful implementation of diversity and inclusion programs. But I really think that a lot of times we learn most when we have an epic fail. And so I want to know if anyone on the panel would like to discuss their observation either in their own firm or maybe in a former firm or a colleague's practice where they've seen a program designed to really foster more diversity and inclusion really fail because of poor design or lack of input from top management and what you've learned from that epic fail.
Ooh, good one.
I can jump in.
Anybody?
I'll jump in. No, I can admit mistakes. I'm just going to go back to the comment I made around networks, because I fundamentally believe not only the lifeblood of our organization, but they help shape us to be the organization that we need to be. But I can tell you, when we've gone out and we've tried to say, you working mothers, you need to start a working mother network, or you cancer survivors actually have, we need a cancer survivor network, you start it. That never works. You cannot say to someone, you must do something. It has to come, I believe in diversity and inclusion, it has to come because you fundamentally believe you want to have change, and you're passionate about that change, and you know you can make a difference. So I think the epic fail that I've seen is when we've tried to say, you must do this, this is what we think you should do to our employees. It's when they come back with the ideas, they are our best champions for diversity.
Great. Thank you. Last question right here.
Thanks. I'm June Kim from CalSTRS. So I have a question for Susan and Danielle. We talked a lot about recruiting at that entry level or at different levels. Specifically for the C-suite, can you talk about what you're doing or what more can be done to kind of get more females into that C-suite? Because the people at the top, it's still Ron and Jim, and there are far fewer Helenas.
It takes work. It's interesting. So one of the things that we did, which I thought made a big difference, about 2 years ago, we wanted to figure out how we could do that, get more women into senior roles. And we thought that the best thing to do would be to go out and identify who our high potential women were, and then figure out how we could, again, advance them in the organization. In a firm our size, that's a huge undertaking. First of all, you go out to lots of managers and you say, tell us who your top women are, and you want to distill that down to about 30 or 40 to discuss with your senior management team. I think people generally want to toss so many names into that bucket, right? But we managed to get it down to about 30 people. And I think one of the most powerful things that we did is to create profiles of those 30 and walk into the operating committee and sit for about 2 hours. And we went through person by person and talked about where were they, how were they doing, were they ready for another job? If they could be put in another job, what would that job be? And it was a really hard task, but it was really worth it, because at the end of the day, we had, the OpCo members really debating each other. I remember we had one person who said, I think that person's kind of hit her ceiling, and someone said, wait a minute, she's got all these degrees, she's brilliant. If you don't have a job for her, I have a job for her. So talent trading started to happen. And, we've been looking at the metrics around it, and it's interesting, still more to do, but early results is that 40% of the women we discussed have been advanced in some way in the organization, and I don't know if they would have been otherwise, right? The big challenge for us, though, is to sustain that, right? And do that over and over again, and not just have that be a one and done, because if you do it as a one and done, it doesn't work. You have to keep doing it. But that's an exercise that we did with our firm's operating committee. We then did the same thing with people of color the next year, and similar results. So I think the discipline of doing that is really, really important, and if you can get your operating committees to do that, it's worth it. It's worth the work and the effort to have that kind of conversation about each person.
And I think, too, it's really important to have conversations with the folks that may not be in the 40% that got picked, so that they can understand what they need to do, what they need to develop, what jobs they may need to move in the organization to get the skills they need to move to those next levels. I sometimes feel if a person doesn't make it, they sort of get set aside and they don't get the feedback that they need to really advance. And I think that feedback is a critical step to making that 40 be probably the next 60 or 70.
I agree.
Great. Well, with that, join me in thanking our panelists, Julianne, John, Susan, and Dorothy. And thank you for sitting in on my living room. Next time I'll have some wine. Thank you.
Thank you so much.